For today's colored pencil technique, we are going to do a gemstone. I have chosen all the greens, a couple of the blues, a bright yellow, and a dark red. I think that one's called dark red mahogany out of my 24-piece Crayola set. Most of them are sharp enough. I might sharpen while I'm working. And I also have my black pen that I can use to just draw a shape to work in. So the simplest gemstone look is just a circle-ish type thing. Gemstones don't have to be perfectly cut either, but a lot of times they're either a circle or kind of an oval. You can find a lot of videos on YouTube about doing faceted gemstones, and that's another technique, which is just a blast. But I'm going to start with something that's just kind of like a circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, if you try to make it perfect, it just looks unnatural. So just kind of go around and make it a circle-ish shape. We're going to go probably and do some decorative work around the outside of that after we get the gemstone colored. I'm going to go for my end result here will hopefully be mostly green. So maybe a jade, something like that. And these are not meant to look exactly real, but you'll notice I have, if you were looking at the color wheel, you had blue and yellow with green in between it. The majority of my pencils are green, but all of these colors are next to each other on the color wheel. And this one is opposite the green on the coloring wheel. So this is one I'll probably use for the darker colors. And I like to start with my darkest colors. So what I'm going to do is just really lightly with my red, because this is where it's going to be kind of a shadow. I'm just going to fill in kind of a crescent shape down along the bottom of this circle. So really hard to see because I'm going so light, but that tells me that's where I want my shadow. Also, the red undertone is going to make my greens darker as I work up in my layers. And if you want, you could do a little bit around the top and the edges. I'm going to have more on the bottom because I'm going to have my highlight be closer to the top. Okay, so enough red for now. Remember, we work in layer after layer after layer. If you want to leave your highlights section really light, you can just go in right now and do kind of a circular area in the top half, and you can hardly even see that. But if I do some white first on the paper, it'll keep that spot lighter than all the others, even as I add color. Okay, I'm going to start with my darkest green. So with my green, I'm going to kind of go over the reds I already did. And it's going to go also a little bit further around. I'm, again, very, very light layer. I'm going to make my crescent with this layer a little bit bigger than the last one. So I'm kind of going to come around a little bit further and a little bit wider. Again, I'm trying to just go super smooth, like tickling the paper right over the top of that. So I get a nice layer. This time I'm going to go all the way around the circle with it. This is kind of the color that I want my end product to be. So I'm going to start with this one and I'm going to come back to it and kind of end with it. So once we start getting some shadows on well, it's really a large orb is what it is. It's going to start to look not flat anymore. All right, I think I'm going to go to my yellow green and I'm going to do over all of this again. And I'm going to do a light pressure, but I'm going to do the same thing I did before. This one's going to go, I'm going to cover all of it, but this one's going to go even further out than the first two did. And right now you can kind of see the different colors I'm using, but as I build up the layers, you won't be able to see where one color changes to another one. Every time I go around and add another color, my innermost lines around my circle here are so light pressure that you can barely see where the colored pencil ends. So I'm kind of blending, the pressure is a blended out edge. That makes it easier to blend the rest of the layers, so you don't have a hard line where your colors ended. All right, I think I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to my highlight area. So I'm actually starting in the center and working out in just some really big, soft circles. Just getting some colored pencil on the paper here. All right. Now, that's my first set of layers. I'm probably going to need to come back in and darken my edges, but for my second layer, I think I'm going to start with the dark green. And as you're building up, you're going to feel your paper get smoother as you go, as the pigment kind of fills in the tooth of the paper. So again, I'm kind of going back to where my dark green was in the first place and putting another layer of it. This time I'm being really careful to get all the way out to the edges. But I'm still pretty light. The more pigment you get on the paper, the heavier your pressure can be, and it won't leave harsh lines on it. Okay, so every once in a while, because I want my gemstone to end up basically being green. So I'm just going to keep going back to green. But one of the fun things with colors is if you go to the color next to this color on the color wheel. So blue is next to green. I've got my dark blue, and I'm going to go back in the shadows areas, just the darkest areas with this. You'll start to see, now you can't even see where my colored pencil meets my black line that we had originally. Objects in nature do not have a black outline around them. So I like to kind of make my pen line disappear a little bit. And I'm doing the same thing I did with the red here, just very lightly around the edges, changing that to just getting a darker shadow. And I did more on the bottom again or it's wider on the bottom than I did on the top. You can start to see how much shadow we're getting there. So then maybe I'll go, well, just for fun, I'm going to add the jade green, which is just a little bit different shade of green. And I'm going to go over all of the blue and most of the green I had before. And as I'm coloring back and forth across those colors, I'm kind of just thinking of almost like this is paint that I'm mixing together on the surface of the paper rather than on a paint palette. And as I go out to the edges, I'm going lightly so that it kind of blends with those yellows that were out there. So different colors in your layers will help not only create the shadows, but will kind of help determine the shade or the tint of the color that you end up with. So if it's too bright, maybe do a layer of something like this jade green that's a little bit more towards an army green or something. All right, I think my highlight area is a little bigger than I want, so I'm going to start putting more green in that space. We'll keep it pretty light, and I'll probably go back a couple times to the yellow green. And as my paper fills in, and the tooth of the paper fills in more and more, the colors are going to get more intense. And I need to push a little bit harder to blend them together where there's a lot of layers. So this technique works really well if you want to draw fruit with your colored pencils, because a lot of fruit is kind of rounded. An orange for sure, apples, and you can use a variety of colors in your layers. You don't have to use them in the entire area, but you can put all kinds of colors in your red apple. All right, now as my layers are building up and I'm seeing less and less of the paper through this, I can actually push a little bit harder. Every time it just gets a little bit harder. But I'm still kind of going back and forth, and I'll go lighter pressure as I come closer to the center of my gemstone. You can see how dark that edge is. But even though I used red and blue underneath it, as I come back with the green, what your eye sees is a green orb. It doesn't see the red and the blue behind it. Right, trying to go around there. So if you can see this as a ball, it looks like the light is hitting the top of the ball, which means that we would probably have a shadow underneath the ball. Let's see, maybe if the light was coming a little bit from this direction, I'll do the shadow out this way. Just do it kind of like that. And your shadow actually could be a different color, because the shadow might depend on what color your surface is. So you know what, I'm going to put a little bit of red on my surface. Sometimes if you have a green ball on a white surface, the light that's reflected on the white surface will actually be green from the ball. Sometimes if your surface was a different color, it will be a darker version of that color. Your shadow will just be a darker version of your surface color. And then sometimes right next to an object, it seems like the cast shadow should be really dark right up against your object, but sometimes there's a little bit of light reflected off your object right next to it, and then it gets darker just right out from that. So I'm using my dark blue here for a little bit of a deeper shadow. I think I'm going to go back over and create more of a red surface here. I could get out a number of different reds out of my colored pencil set to create that. But if I just go around the edges here, I can kind of soften my shadow. All right, now with colored pencils, the final layers are often called burnishing. And burnishing is literally rubbing pretty hard and using a light color like your white to add pressure to the original layers, and thinking of blending it together almost like you're melting the layers of pencil together. So sometimes I'll burnish it with a white, especially if you have a white in a Crayola set or something that it's not a really opaque white. It doesn't cover the paper white. It just kind of blends them all together. But even after I do this, you'll see I'm using my Prismacolor white, so it is making the colors lighter. But even after I do that, to kind of burnish those areas, I can come back with my final color, which is the one that I kind of want you to see when you look at it, is I want it to be green. And I can burnish those darker areas with the green. What I'm really doing is just making sure that the colored pencil pigment is getting pushed into every little speck of paper. And that's where I get the intensity of colors with colored pencil. So like I said, I like to end with one of my final layers being the color that I want you to really notice when you look at something, or I guess I could call it my finished color. Okay, I'm also going to lighten the pressure here and soften the edge there. And I'm going to come in with my lighter green. It's called yellow green. And also kind of burnish up the next layer with this one. There's a couple other things that you can buy if you really enjoy doing colored pencils. One is called a colorless blending pencil, and it's basically a colored pencil that doesn't have any color in it, which kind of sounds funny, but it's the same waxy, oily stuff that your colored pencil is made out of. They just didn't put any color in it. That is used like at this point as a burnisher, just to combine all the other colors you had on the paper. And I could even put a little bit of yellow up in those last areas. I kind of scribble in different shapes and sizes of circles. And I suppose I should do the same thing for my shadow here. Okay, if I wanted to play with this a little more, I might have done a border around the orb. I suppose I could still do a little bit of it with a black pen. Although my shadow is kind of going to get in the way of this, so we'll just pretend I didn't do that shadow. I could do an aura line all the way around it. Notice I'm kind of stopping and starting, and let my pen kind of flick off the end a little bit every time I have to stop, so it's not a blunt edge. Okay, then we could do something like the crescent moon that we worked on in class, which is a bunch of little ladybug bumps all the way around the outside. This will take me a minute to complete all of these. So what I'm going to do is kind of skip ahead, and I'll take all of these bumps that I just did, and I will do an aura around every one of them. I think I'm going to do 2 auras around each one first. And then I'm going to do a couple of little tiny drop shapes in between them. Maybe a little feather off of each side of that. So drop shape, feather, drop shape, feather in each of those areas. See, my first drop shape's just a little bit taller than my crescent moon. And then I'm going to leave the ends a little unfinished, because if I want to finish this and keep connecting things, I need to make sure and leave room for it. So I'm going to start up here, and what I'm going to do is do an aura around the entire thing. I always think that the gemstone idea here with some decorative border around it just looks like fancy jewelry. So there we go, using the crescent moon from week 1, the drop shape and feathering from week 2, and the aura that we've also talked about around a simple circle that we colored with Crayola colored pencils. Nothing fancy there, just a 24 pack set, which I think in most stores is $3 or $4. And my $1 dollar store, actually these usually come 2 in a pack at Dollar Tree, which is now $1.25, but I use these pens all the time. So nothing really special for supplies here. And not really a plan when I started. It just did something kind of fun. So of course you could add some color to the border, add some yellow and gold tones, and even some browns and oranges that would make it look like a gold jewelry. Or you could put some gel pens in there and add some sparkle and some glitter. So have fun with that. And as always, be sure to share pictures with me. Love seeing your pictures when you guys watch the video. And whether or not you like it the first time, wait till tomorrow. It'll look even better then.